Izzo, good to see.
All right. We are live on Tuesday, April 7th. I am here. My name's Michael with Reconciled, and I am here with my fellow accounting guests and friends, Jacob Schroeder. I got it right this time with Ascend Consulting, Amy Walker, CPA, and Dan Luthi with Ignite Spot. And we're here to provide you an update from the SBA on the PPP loan that related to the CARE Act and any other information we've learned over the past 24 hours since our last update yesterday. So thank you guys for jumping on. And I think Jacob is going to take the lead today. You didn't know that until now.
No, I didn't.
But so Jacob, was there anything of use to share from yesterday's updated guidance that was sent out from the SBA and the Treasury to banks and lenders?
Yeah, so I think there was two big things that I grabbed out of there. And one was clarification on the fact that employer taxes should not be included in payroll cost. So I know we had discussed this several times on our show here and said it should not be, but there were many payroll providers that were adding that in. And we had talked how aggravated we were on there. So it was nice to see the SBA come out and kind of put those people in their place and say, no, really, this should not be in there. So that true guidance was helpful. It was also interesting to see some timeframe guidance from the SBA and say they were fine with 2019 or the preceding 12 months. So there's a lot of questions out there. Which one should it be? So they said it's fine, whatever the bank wants to use. And some banks are taking whatever's advantageous to you. So it might be important to look at that both ways, and the bank will take whichever one is better for you. So the other big one that came out of there was some more clarification around the $100,000 cap per employee. So that $100,000 cap per the SBA guidance is only on what they called cash compensation, which means gross wages plus cash tips. So any of the state unemployment, health insurance benefits, retirement benefits, those are not included in there. So those are not capped out, and you can go above and beyond that. And I'll raise my hand and say, we could have got a client more money. We have an SBA loan number already. We can't change it. We could have gotten more money. So that's one we didn't guess right on, right? But that is a big update and changes a lot of people's calculations.
All right, so for those companies that actually got in and made a filing before these last clarifications were issued, it's just between you and your lender now. If you included those taxes in your average monthly income, I think the right thing to do, if we actually get to speak with a lender. I mean, I don't know if this is going to be an automatic process, like if they're going to say, approved, here's the money. Chase's message last night kind of acted like, if you're approved, you'll see the money in your, I think the wording was, your oldest business account we have that's still open within X amount of time. I don't know if we're actually going to speak with somebody or if it's a, oh, you did it wrong, you're out. I doubt that very seriously.
So I'm hearing there needs to be a closing document still. And that's the thing that's stopping funding right now, is none of the banks have an actual closing document from the SBA that actually truly closes the loan out and does the funding side. So even banks out there who are getting an SBA number and they're actually getting things submitted to the SBA, they are not comfortable funding because they do not have a document that closes. So I think the few cases we've heard of somebody funding is where a bank has a prior relationship with somebody and they're truly just advancing that money because they know the business needs it, and they'll sign the true loan document later. And those banks are taking massive risk, is my guess. Or they're doing a short-term loan document.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of truth to that through that process. I think the one thing that's really funny or really interesting to me, I guess it's not funny, but interesting to me as we compare this is, we look at the stimulus that each individual is looking for through this process. And we've now heard that they're only allowed to print like $5 million, 5 million checks a day or something from that standpoint. There's supposed to be 100 million checks or whatever is issued. and it's going to be 5 or 6 months before everybody receives their money. All of this talk is really exciting about all these things that are going to be promised and how quickly it's going to be invested or, exuded from the government. And I think that's where a lot of the problem is stemming from through this process is they've come with this space saying, hey, we're committing all of these things. We're going to have people figured out and it's going to be available to you in 5 minutes is what it feels like. But to the point to that is it almost would have been better if they said, hey, we know we have to figure some things out. It's going to take 3 weeks at minimum for us to clarify this process. And we're going to work tirelessly with these people to solidify this process so that you as small business owners know what expected, but here's our cutoff date. Here's our cutoff expectation through that. Instead, the process came out and said, hey, look what we're going to do. Here's our date when it's going to be available. Yeah. Look at us. We're doing this. We're making it rain on all of the, the economy and making everything great. And they put small business owners in turmoil, trying to figure out, well, does it make sense to keep my business owner open? Does it not? If I can get this in the next week, yeah, we can survive for this 8-week period. And we don't have to put people on unemployment. But instead, we put people in these positions where they have to make really difficult decisions, not knowing what's going to happen to them on the other side. Along with that, to Jacob's point, one of the things I thought was really interesting about the information that came from the SBA is they also dove in a little bit more in depth regarding the 500 employee rule, which was really interesting as well. And they more or less not lifted, but gave reasons where people with 500 employees can get around the boundaries from that standpoint.
They expanded it.
Exactly. And so now you put it in a different position. They've also, the thing I like about it is they did put some max caps on tangible net worth, which I think is super crucial from that standpoint, saying if you have, you can have no more than $15 million in tangible net worth, because there is a lot of organizations that have a lot of part-time employees that are thousands and thousands of part-time employees. FTEs maybe at 600 based off of that, but there's no way they're worth $15 million or $16 million just because of the way that they do their work or the seasonality of what's going on. So I think it's great. I think that provides some opportunity to people who are really in need. Staffing agencies are going to be a big part of that piece, I think, in just having short-term FTEs that kind of come through and process with it. But definitely think that this has just caused a whole lot of people headache and emotional distress. And we see on social media that, one person gets a loan and we're like, oh, maybe I'll get mine. It ain't going to happen for another week. Let's be honest. We're going to be dragging this out and giving these random updates just because we're hoping that things are going to be working through it. Maybe I'm just too pessimistic. You guys all tell me if I'm wrong on that.
Have any of you, so just so for people watching, have any of you, whether it's your firm or your customers, actually received actual funds, or have any of you or your customers signed another document for your bank after submitting all your information? Have any of you signed anything anything outside of this initial application process and possibly even getting an SBA loan number? Have any of you done that or received any money that you know of, or your customers have received funds? So I think most of the stories we are hearing that there are some people who've received funds. I don't know if that's true or if that's just literally fake news. So on Twitter, because how do we verify that? But I think the majority of people, the vast majority of people, have not received funds, have at best received an approval from their bank with an SBA loan number, and are still actually waiting on a final form to sign, a closing document, something that then allows the money to be dispersed from the bank to them. And the customers that have received funds, like we've all said, most likely they've had a long-term relationship with the bank, and the bank themselves have said, we're going to give you that money because we trust that you're going to sign this document if it ever comes from the SBA, and we have a good relationship and we know you pay on time, and we want to make sure your business survives the next several weeks. And all the rest of our customers are going to wait several more weeks to actually get their funds. So that's kind of the assumption I think is we are having. Is that right? The right track we're all thinking in our minds? And
I don't know.
And I think we've got, yeah, I think we've, between all of us and then our colleagues that we're chatting with all the time, and we've got all the big banks covered, all the regional banks are covered. I mean, no, nobody except for like what Jake was saying.
I think even Marco Rubio had something in a tweet thread from yesterday that he even recognized the fact that the SBA still needed to release the closing documents. So no funds were really being moving out. So they recognize that. Now it's interesting, today they went back and started another bill for another 200 billion into this program. So you would go from 350 to 550. The other thing he, in one of his tweets, said they were looking at setting a portion of that aside for non-traditional lenders so that the banks could not touch and would only be pushed through non-traditional lenders. So that could be interesting to see how some of that develops and how that works, right? As more lenders come on board, and are banks the best way to get this out? And frankly, in his tweet, he said it looks like the banks are not the best way to get this money out to people, which is a really interesting stance for a legislator to take, right? Especially the lobbying dollars that we know get paid.
What universe do we live in where Marco Rubio is like our saving like moment of clarity for us?
It's
Thank you,
his
Marco.
chance. He's come back. He had a day during the Republican primary back in 2016, and now he's having his day on Twitter, which none of us expected. Now, I do know that he was a co-sponsor of the Senate version of the bill that was originally introduced by Mitch McConnell. What I did learn last night, that the actual bill that passed was a 2019 House bill that was introduced before the CARES Act actually happened, before the pandemic hit. It was a House bill that was introduced by a Democratic House member. I forgot the name. And then it was reused or amended by the Senate, by the House, to introduce their version of the CARES Act, which was then brought over to the Senate and voted on and then passed by the president ultimately. So it's very interesting. If you look up on the bills online, I did some nerd searching last night for the CARES Act. There's multiple versions, but the one that actually got finally through and must have aligned with the Senate will was a House bill that was introduced in 2019. So very odd that I did not know this, that you could have bills being introduced and then ultimately created for a future non-related reason through amendments and votes. And so it makes really like no sense at all, I think, to the normal human being. But that was really, really interesting information to research and find out about last night. But I agree with Dan. Like, what we're finding is the banks are not.
What you search for on the internet when you're bored is really weird, dude.
I wanted to know, why has nobody?
I'm watching squirrels water ski,
Yeah.
and you're researching. I mean,
CARES Act.
I'm looking for breaks from the world, and
Yeah.
definitely shows the difference in personality.
Squirrels on water skis. That's hilarious.
Marco co-signed this bill. Oh, that's what.
Who was the original sponsor of the bill, right? Who came up with the idea? And I wanted to know, and why aren't they not taking credit for it, as Trump and the administration and the SBA and the Treasury takes credit for it? Why hasn't this person? And I'm realizing is they may not want to take credit for it, right?
Because it's for their bill is for something completely different.
Right. And then, yep, what we're also learning is the banks, if you want to get out a loan or money, a stimulus to small businesses, they may be the best route if you want your loans to meet regulatory and compliance standards. But if it's about speed, that's a completely different question. And what we're learning is speed to most business owners, especially ones that have shut down or are hurting right now, is not the same measurement than what the banks can produce in regards to their speed. So you're right, Dan. I think they should have waited and said, we've passed this, but you cannot apply for it for another 3 weeks or another 5 weeks. And that what they should have done is just done quick bridge loans that had quick approval on the SBA website, which was the original idea of the disaster advance, right?
Yeah.
And it's also the idea of the SBA Express bridge loan. They could have done that a lot faster through other means and not made the requirements, but instead it did it this way. But this is, the best we can expect right now from the government, from the SBA, and they're trying their best. Again, yesterday we talked about how our bankers are working really hard, and I appreciate the challenges they're having because most bankers don't control the bank. The ones we work with, they don't control the bank, and they can't just make lending decisions on their own. So they're waiting. Their hands are tied.
And I'll say this for the accounting people out there. Typically, a bank has a whole lot more small business customers than any accounting firm does, right? And some of these banks have appointed one point person for their PPP loans, and those people are getting killed, right? Like, there's no doubt about it.
Don't you wish there could be some, how doctors will volunteer to help in times of crisis and disciplines outside of their own? Don't you wish there'd be like, accountants, come volunteer and help us tick and tie these applications and get them through?
It may end up happening, Amy. It may end up happening.
Yeah.
As a former banker, I know that they are definitely working at least until 6 o'clock at night now.
Do we have any fake holidays coming up that we need to close down for so that everybody else will be open but the bank?
No, holidays,
I'll say
we no longer actually celebrate as a society, but we still have on the list.
Yeah.
But this is where it's going to matter what your banker's like, right? We talked about this before. My bankers were in there on Sunday morning at 8:30, 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning to make sure we got our loans processed, right? Yeah. I know those bankers have my back. There's other bankers in town that my clients are using. Would have never thought of it, right? So once again, I think it's interesting to see maybe those banking relationships that used to always be so important that we've kind of moved away from as a society coming back to play.
Yeah.
Has there been any additional guidance put up by the SBA or the Treasury since yesterday that any of you are aware of?
No.
Since other than the FAQ that the Treasury put out last night?
Yeah, other than that.
Yeah.
So we should be expecting probably another one tonight, I'm assuming.
Another 4 pages of convoluted data.
Yeah.
But undoes the previous 2 pieces of guidance.
I did witness an interesting experience today. I was helping a client. Hello, Chris Kessler, if you're listening. While he was filling out his application, the form that he sent me a sample form so I could read it along, we could follow along, and we were arguing about what line 5 said. I said, my line 5 doesn't say that. He's like, I'm looking at it. They updated the form while he was in the middle of the application.
Wow.
So that shows you how fast it's changing.
Yeah, I was doing one of them today, actually. And they have, the page of disclosures of I have not robbed a bank. I have not embezzled money from a charity that benefits homeless rabbits. All of those questions. And the same question got asked 3 or 4 times in there because they're just slapping these disclosures in there, all willy-nilly, copy paste, because they must be talking to other bankers that are saying, oh, you have to have this one in here and this one. But the phrasing's a little bit different, but it's the exact same disclosure.
Yeah. I did want to call out one of the things on the FAQ that came through, and this goes back to a conversation that Jacob and I have had 1.5 million times. It's number 16. I'm sure you've got almost this memorized to your heart of hearts, and so I wanted to get. I'd actually think it would be good for us to briefly kind of have a discussion about this, because I think that this is where a lot of confusion comes in with different lenders. And I think this is something that's important for all of us to kind of give take on what we're seeing from the people that we're working with. But the question that comes into it, or that's being proposed, is, how should a borrower account for federal taxes when determining its payroll costs for purposes of maximum loan amount allowable use on the PPP loan and the amount of the loan that may be forgiven? So it goes in and gives some direct detail. But I'm gonna turn the time over to you, Jacob, because I'm utilizing you in my mind as the complete perfect expert on this, because you've been talking about this since day one on how this should be calculated.
So I guess I can tout I was right on this, but I was wrong on a lot of other things. So I don't know that I would tout myself as the expert. So in this, they're basically saying gross income already includes employee taxes, right? So we are going to use gross income.
Mhm.
However, we should not be looking at employer taxes, because employer taxes are never in gross wages, right? Like that's not part of gross wages. That's the employer portion. So you would not add employer paid taxes onto your payroll cost to get to that calculation. And I do agree, Dan, this is super important to call out, because so many payroll companies were subtracting the employee withheld portion, and then they swung all the way the other way, where they left the employee portion in there and added the employer portion. And very few of them before today were calculating this correctly. And I think that's important to know, because
Did the AICPA say to include the employer taxes in that?
Yeah, so even the AICPA came out and said this wrong. Well, so I take that back. What the AICPA came out and said was, don't exclude these taxes. They never talked about changing the inclusion calculation, right? So if you think about this, if you look in the bill or anywhere it's laid out, it's here's what you should add up, here's what you should subtract. What the AICPA came out and said is you shouldn't subtract that number, but it was never in the top portion of where you would have added it. So it wouldn't have been there anyways. Now, many people interpreted that to be, oh, we should be adding it. But it was never part of the addition calculation to start with. So I think that's where a lot of the confusion is, right? And it's confusion around AICPA could have been much clearer in their wording, for sure. And people took that and ran with it.
Yeah. I think what's good about the way they answered this too is they gave a very clear-cut example.
Yes.
Of like, this is how simplistic we want you to think about this. Let's not add complication to it. Also in number 17 on this, which is right after, I think is really good, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who have already applied and put their information in. They applied with some other calculation in place. And so it comes down here and says, we understand that people had different interpretations. We're fine going with what you had before and basis from there. The goal with this is you just to apply as clearly as you can and in good faith as much as possible. It's not always going to be perfect. If your bank asks for something different, just update the number and we'll work, the bank should be working with you through that process. And so that to me gives a little bit of comfort with both of those together on people who haven't filed yet, maybe who just put their initial core application in and haven't actually had requested documentation yet, just to keep themselves, kind of together and covered through that basis.
All right, I want to shift us to a quick different topic. We can intro it now and then do more tomorrow and Thursday.
So Michael, before we jump topics, yeah. I just want to say one thing on some clarification that has came out. For those people out there, you can apply for a PPP loan and an EIDL loan for COVID-19. And I'm making sure we clarify this because there's been some confusion around it. So before we shift topics, I want to make sure we get this. If you get an EIDL loan, you will not be able to use that for payroll purposes, but you can use it for other purposes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just know that. And then lots of people have been questioning, when is the advance going to come? Because I applied for an EIDL. That advance calculation is not $10,000. It does appear there's a calculation of it now of $1,000 per employee, which we talked about yesterday. I'm hearing rumors that we can expect that next week, not this week, which is much longer than the 3 days they told us, but that is what we're hearing. Whether there's any validity to that or if it'll just change again. And then obviously that's the advance piece. Then there's the loan piece, which we're probably looking out a month on before that would come into play. So just wanted to kind of do that quick recap of the rest of the loans before we transition into other things.
That's great. That's great, Jacob. And two others related to that. If you have a current SBA loan, you can can go to your bank and access a bridge loan as you wait for the disaster loan. So you can go to your bank, get an SBA Express $25,000 loan from your bank. So you have to go to your bank and ask for it. And it can help you get that bridge loan. And then the second one is if you have a current SBA loan, a 7A loan, a 504 loan, or a micro loan, the SBA will pay for the next 6 months your principal and interest payments. So it's not a deferment. They're actually paying your monthly payments. No more, no less, but they're paying those. So if you haven't heard about that, or you are still having your SBA payments taken out of your bank account, or you're sending them in, reach out to your bank and ask them about this, of the SBA covering your next 6 months if you have a current SBA loan, and they should be able to facilitate that. Now, Chris has finally got some shades, a different kind of shade on his head so that he can see all of us, which is awesome.
I actually went on to Home Depot today to order a shade, and they aren't shipping anything right now unless you want to do it.
Too little, too late, Chris. Too little.
Can you say something with a Chicago accent, because you look like Mike Ditka?
I'm doing my best. Listen,
If you want to put your
listen,
address,
listen,
Chris, you want to put your mailing address in the comments so somebody can mail you a set of shades and the size of your window.
It's a sizable window. Like it's like 3 feet across. There's nothing I can do.
There may be a blinds company watching this that has not a lot of customers right now, is willing to send you a sample, Chris.
Yeah, if they want to go ahead and sponsor this Facebook Live, the cost of sponsoring it is one
Shade.
shade.
I will say, I mean, you can just use your Ninja Turtle comforter and put that up on your window too. That'll do the exact same thing. All
That
you
one
need is
is
two
in the
push
dry
pins.
right now.
So one of the things, though, I'll add to this kind of just as a thought and just kind of throw it out there from that standpoint. I think that we've talked about some timelines and deadlines and things from that standpoint. The reality is money's not coming as fast as we all anticipated, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we got clients who are in positions who are looking for cash. Chris works with a lot of restaurants, and so they were hit almost immediately with all of this. And so it put them all in a very difficult position right out the top. And so the question now comes into place is how do we deal with cash flow?
Yes.
There's some unforeseeable understandings of when we're going to get money and how we work through that. And so what are some things that our small business owners who have applied or who are waiting for confirmation should be thinking or should be considering with cash flow as they're working through this? Should we be going out and buying software to, if they're not with an accountant or they're with an accountant, what kind of things should we be looking at in order to be able to kind of help facilitate that? And I think we start with Chris, because Chris has been working with some restaurants who definitely need some love right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been telling restaurants at this point that if they are taking out the PPP loan, that they really need to do the calculation for their FTE equivalencies before determining whether they're going to take that loan or take the EIDL, because if they've already laid off a lot of people and they're not planning on taking those people back on for payroll, then they can't afford the principal payment of a 2-year loan for $80,000. Like, that's just not in the math for any restaurant to be able to take that, because that's going to end up being an additional mortgage payment because it's a 2-year term. So essentially we're having our clients take out the maximum that they can and calculating what we think the FTE is going to be by the end of this period, the 8-week period, and leaving everything else off to the side until we really figure out what's going to happen when all the chips hit the floor. Because going forward after this point in time, it's not like the impact of this is going to be done, right? especially for seasonal businesses, the thing that I feel like is going to get a lot of our clients is not necessarily what's going to happen in the next 3 months, but what's going to happen, because the next 3 months are normally their highest sales months. And so these summer months are pretty much shot at this point. And we're not looking at 3 months of poor sales. We're looking at 9 months of poor sales. Like, we're looking at waiting now for next April or May being the month in which there's actual economic recovery from this. And that's a little bit scary to think about.
I think there's some really good points that you bring up with that, you know, as you're going through and trying to determine PPP or EIDL or how you go through that process. I mean, determining, and we've all discussed this, you know, a dozen times to Sunday regarding everything should be treated as a loan. Yes, there's portions forgivable, but everything should be treated as a loan, because to Chris's point, you don't know if you're going to be able to, even at your own choice, to have the requirements for complete forgiveness on the loan. And so you as a business owner or as an accountant need to be thinking about, how do we store this cash in the event that there is a need or what's happening with it? With that being said, you also have to consider, does 2 years materially make sense for us as an organization on this loan? Also, does it make sense for us to do a 2-year loan? Even at 1%, to Chris's point, $80,000 is really difficult to recover from that. Yeah, once you fund, there's that 6-month grace period, which gives a little bit of ground to try to recover some of those pieces. But even with that, you know, 30 months is still a very short time from when you take a loan to having that type of money completely paid back. And so factoring your industry, factoring the impacts that you have on that it has on you, is definitely a crucial part of the thought process that we should be having through that process. Looking at the seasonality of your industry, if you have it, understanding that. My hope, and I think this is one of the things that I just kind of add to the context of this, my hope is that because everybody's vacations through the first part of the year are completely ruined, that we all, once things kind of settle a little bit, we try to utilize those. And so even with places where you don't normally go in the fall or winter time, people are still going to be trying to visit those, because there's still association or memories or experiences you can go with it. Maybe not so much to the middle of nowhere in Montana, where they're going to have 32 feet of snow in December, whereas you normally would visit it in the summer when there's not. But definitely still think there's going to be some good things out there. But love to hear your guys' other thoughts on cash flow. Chris, you got one more.
Listen, you can all come to the Berkshires. We have a great food scene here. We have some great hotels. You guys can come up, go skiing for a weekend. You can do that in December. It's great.
Yeah. So book your hotels for the Berkshires right now. Hopefully they're on discounted rates for November and December and January of 2021. And just lock in those vacation benefits right now. I will say to that, just as a side note, my family is going on a Disneyland trip with all of my brothers and sisters and everything. And my wife and I were planning on driving because it's only 10 hours, so it's not a big deal. And we've done it, you know, many, many times. But and all the rest of my family bought plane tickets like a month ago. And we were just watching. All of a sudden it popped up at less than $100 a ticket for my family to fly out. And so we snagged those things up right away. So now we're flying, which saves us a whole bunch of time and parking and everything from that standpoint, and makes life a whole lot easier. But sometimes just sitting and waiting does give some benefit from that standpoint, and gives you at least some hopes of things.
The park?
Our trip's not until September, so hopefully before September. But I think there's thoughts, at least with that they're not opening until the end of April, first part of May, theoretically, is what the plan is. But
hey,
cash
Chris,
flow,
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Chris, I'm interested to know now that, you know, restaurants are still allowed are they in Massachusetts, are they still allowed to have takeout?
Yeah, they can do takeout, and actually this week they're allowed to do takeout beverage as well. Which
that includes alcohol, I'm assuming. Alcohol as well. Alcohol.
Oh,
alcohol
yes.
to go.
Yeah. Sorry.
Like
yeah.
this size
By
of
beverage,
alcohol.
beverage, I mean like a bottle of wine or beer. New York State has actually
Long Island's like in 44 ounce.
4 ounce, not Long Island. New York has opened it up so that you can do to-go liquor.
That's Ohio just opened that up as well today.
Crazy. Like just like driving down the highway with a martini.
With a piece
right,
of tape over
I'm
the top. So how much do you, I mean, we've had a few weeks of it now. Is the takeout business going to keep them afloat?
It is not going to keep them afloat. If they were already if they had already set themselves up to be takeout and for that to be a sizable part of their business, they're fine. They have the systems in place for it. They have all of those sorts of things. I've gotten those businesses to purchase like all of the to-go containers that they can, because there is a legitimate concern about running out of those supplies. But if that's not what they were originally set up to do, it really didn't work out. And a lot of these businesses really had to put together like a really strong social media push in order to stay in front of people's minds so that they go and support those businesses. So I would say any of our like sit down restaurants, dine-in options that didn't have a lot of takeout are closed and have laid off a lot of their employees. But we have had a few that have stayed open and have been in good shape.
So Chris, to that point, those ones that maybe pivoted really well and started doing a lot of takeout, are you seeing that hold? Or are you seeing like, as the longer this goes, their sales are starting to taper off? Like everybody came out and supported them really well on the front end, right? And then as this goes longer, maybe people don't go back to that as well because that's not their typical takeout, take home that they're used to.
It is it's really, a lot of it is contingent upon how they're doing in terms of marketing, and how they're gearing up their menu design in order to suit that. There's a lot of businesses that have like changed their business plan so that they're not like conventional takeout, but like a assemble it yourself, like I'm trying to think of those order companies, not Blue Card.
Almost like the HelloFresh,
exactly. Setting up like a HelloFresh basically, where like you'll have house-made pasta, you'll have all the components of that dish, and then you can assemble it for your family, and it's larger so that it's well suited for like cooking for your entire family as opposed to just yourself. And those businesses have done really well, because it's different and it is, and they've also done a marketing campaign that's captivated audiences. But I think that any of the businesses that have been a sit-down restaurant that are relying on a phone call, somebody to pick up the phone and call them to do a takeout order of a burger and fries that they had on the menu beforehand, are not doing well at all.
Not at all.
They have, as much as I hate to say this word, like they have not pivoted well through this or at all.
Beth Melcher, we're sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. This is key in regards to the time for your business to pivot. If you'd like it to survive, if you're still doing you were relying on novel approaches to get revenue or to serve your customers, those novel approaches no longer can work. And yeah, I would expect large prepped meals for families would be highly popular because parents still don't want to cook. So they didn't want to cook before, and that didn't change just because their kids are home.
Or if they want to cook, they want it to be easy.
They want it to be easy.
Yeah.
And they're relying on schools to still get lunches to their kids somehow, a lot of families. And so they're getting bag lunches or waiting for deliveries from schools or picking those up. And many families, they like that easy prep pre-prepped or prepped meal. And so that's I think that pivot's really, really, really great.
And I think this is going to become even more critical of like refining your operation. So I think, as we continue down some of this topic as well in later episodes, not just focused on maybe what's happening in the loan situation, but I was talking to a bank officer the other day, and it's from a 6-7 branch bank, and they said between last Thursday and Friday, it's the first time in the time that employee's been there that they didn't have someone overdraw an account. And what that means is that clearly people are starting to hoard cash a little bit, right? Like people who are typical spenders are not spending as much. And we're going to see that trickling down into our businesses as people don't spend as much, which means we're really going to have to refine our operation. We're really going to have to make sure it's dialed in as we continue. So even if you were doing okay, it's not the time to sit back and relax, because it might get harder before it gets better, right? And just know that we can't just sit there and rest on our laurels. We have to look. You're going to have to stay on top of this and really look at it and say, where's my cash flow at? What can we do? We need to do more marketing. How much can we afford to spend on marketing versus how much can't we afford to spend, right? And you're going to really have to work on that side and make sure it's dialed in.
Yeah, I think that a lot of these businesses have really just tried to get rid of the inventory that they've had with takeout and then shut down. And I think that's the logical option there. I've seen a lot of really negative comments about how this recession is going to weed out the weak ones in terms of like businesses that can't afford to like survive this. And the restaurant industry is kind of uniquely positioned in this, that unless you're a huge company like Burger King, no restaurant can afford to do that. And there are restaurants that have 3 Michelin stars that are these beautiful, like beautifully designed spaces that they have a huge mortgage to pay on it. But we're doing perfectly fine, and we're doing perfectly fine through other recessions that are now not. And there's no way that they could have prepared for this specific economic impact. So I don't think it's a fair thing to say like, oh, well, Alinea deserves to close because no one can go into their restaurant right now or leave their house.
Well, I think on that same type of topic, I think that applies to a lot of small business, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of small businesses out there, whether it's printer repair companies who are, do their business based off of usage from other companies, facilitations from that. It's things that we don't really think about in a common space. You look at even the people who sell on Amazon right now, where all of your product is getting pushed weeks and weeks and weeks back on when it's going to ship. Like the impact that all of these things have on your organization, to your point, doesn't just affect restaurants who we know get hit heavily because you can't even walk in their locations. But you think about those other places that are completely almost at a standstill because they don't have the type of volume or traffic or functionality that's going through it. You have to assess what's going on in your world and how can you, or what do you need to do to maintain that? Whether it's managing your inventory and flow of what's going on with it, whether it's observing the pricing that you have for this current period of time. You can't just give away everything for free, hoping that you're going to have good clients in 6 months from that space. Some of those clients may be out of business. You may be out of business because you liquidated everything you had and you didn't have enough to be able to maintain. And so I think there's a lot of concepts and a lot of thoughts that need to go through, whether it's initially asking for deferment from your landlord, right out the chute saying, hey, this just ain't going to work. I can't cover the cost of this for the next 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is. Set a clear expectation with them on what you can do and try to settle as best as possible as you're going through that. If you have inventory, do some in-depth analysis on your inventory. Determine what you can and can't do with it. To your point, if you've got perishables, you got to make some really quick decisions on how to manage those perishables as quickly as possible so that you're not left with just dead product that you can't do anything with. And so I love, Chris's statement about that of some restaurants are liquidating what they can because they don't want it to go to waste, and collect what you can and bank it and then move on from there from that standpoint. But I think you also have to look at that same piece, like going back to, Jacob's initial comment about employees and determining if it makes material sense to do the PPP or makes material sense to do the EIDL. You should be thinking about that process too, and not just looking at, can I make this world easier, great for these people, but what makes the most sense for your business and what materially is going to happen on a survival rate for your organization across the next 3 to 5 months. And I think tomorrow, maybe even Thursday, we dive a little bit deeper into these thought processes and hopefully give some people some thoughts, whether you're accountants or small business owners, of hopefully how you can stay on top of these things. And of course, give updates on anything new release that we're going to see, as we know that's going to happen. Someone's going to tweet something out. It's going to change everything we're doing. But definitely, how do we maintain and survive through this process?
I'm just blown away that like now we can suddenly use the EIDL and PPP together. Like after all the time we spent comparing the two options that we have, now all of a sudden we can just use both of them.
My hope is that instead of that small few that Chris was talking about, where they'll say the weak they just won't survive. I hope they do, but I hope they take away financial lessons from it, because those are the ones that you talk with Cash about all the time, but maybe they think it doesn't really apply yet. Well, it applies now, right? So maybe people will, and small business owners will take that cash reserve seriously, being particular about their debt. We'll take that seriously. And that we'll all I was talking with Karen Rayburn, y'all know her, through Profitable Firm. We were emailing back and forth, and I said, this is a classic example of the tortoise and the hare. And we've been all running like crazy hares for the last couple of weeks, but the tortoise, slow and steady, I think has a better chance.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great update. 50 minutes. It was awesome. A lot of great advice, I think. And I hope useful. The next few days, we're going to try to focus on providing some more cash flow guidance to customers that, okay, let's say you got the PPP loan or not. What do you do now? What do you do while you wait? What else do you access for assistance or help? How you restart if you're already shut down. Those are things that we're thinking through, and we're going to be providing guidance on over the next couple days, and as well as into the near future. So thank you guys for today's update. This has been great.
Thank you guys.